everyone. Welcome and thank you for coming to the conference or inquiry celebrating reason. My name is Shauna Watson and I'm Vice President of CFI Canada. Sandra Dunham is going to be talking about the cost of religion in Canada. Sandra runs a small consulting firm supporting charities and nonprofit organizations. And Sandra is also our Executive Director for CFI Canada. Sandra has a master's degree in public administration and has a 30-year career in the charitable sector. She lives in Moonstone, Ontario, which is just north of Barrie, which is north of Toronto, where she engages in a variety of outdoor activities. Go ahead, Sandra.
Thanks. So I think I've shared my screen. Have I done that successfully?
Yes, we can see your screen.
Perfect. So, welcome to the cost of religion in Canada. CFIC wrote this report, and I'm presenting it today because I believe that a first step to changing the antiquated, expensive, and unjust charitable category of advancement of religion is to make people aware of it. So I do have a specific request for each of you following this presentation. Please share this information. It's really important. And recently, I was interviewed by a Canadian newspaper from Winnipeg, actually, because someone like you, maybe even someone who's here today, told a reporter about this report, about this series of reports, and they were interested. I think that I have put a poll in here, and while I go on, if you would answer the poll, I'm just curious to know who I'm speaking to. So I will get you to do that while I carry on. So I'm just a really small part of writing this report. My co-author, Leslie Rosenblood, our secular chair, is here today. And I had tons of help from other CFIC members, also many of whom are here today. I most especially want to give credit and appreciation to John Manuel. John is a retired chartered accountant, and he has exceptional Excel skills. He worked tirelessly to help me to understand and manipulate the massive amount of data that led to these reports. And John also agreed to be here today so that if you have any questions about the data and it stumps me, he can offer some insight. I also want to acknowledge Andy Way and Ashley Erdl-Retzman, who fact-checked these reports and ensured that we had reputable references for all of the information. Unless you've ever done something like this, you can't even imagine the time and attention to detail it requires. And last but not least, thanks to Shauna Watson and Diane Bruce, board members of CFIC, who offered graphic design and proofreading. So I know you haven't all had a chance to answer the poll, but it looks like 65% of you did not even know the poll existed before today. So I'm glad, or the reports rather. So I'm glad that I'm telling you about them. And 12% of you, 14% of you have read every bit of the reports. So for you, I have to say, spoiler alert, if you plan to continue to read the reports, I'm actually going to give you some information that we haven't released yet. So these reports are going to focus on the financial costs of religion. I understand that there are other costs that are more difficult to quantify. And from time to time, CFIC shares a news stories about what we would call social costs of religion. So for example, last September, we let you know about Northern Youth Programs. This is a conservative Mennonite parachurch organization with a vision that disciples of Jesus Christ will be made in every Aboriginal community in Canada. This is an organization that ran residential schools as late as 1991 and is now running Bible camps, retreats, and counseling services to fly in remote First Nations community. Just this past February, we interviewed an anonymous CFIC member who'd been asked at a job interview whether they would be comfortable praying at the start of meetings. We have consistently shared information about the Catholic school boards in Alberta, Ontario, and Saskatchewan. We've focused on the financial costs, but also on their discriminatory hiring practices and their really harmful policies, especially those related to the LGBTQ plus population. And we shared information about churches, most specifically the Catholic and Mennonite churches, that have misappropriated funds that were donated to help the poor or for other charitable purposes and use them to fund their own operations. And I know that these are arguments that are commonly used against religion. However, first of all, they don't really suggest what change we'd like to see, but they also truly don't provide a strong argument about the need for a secular government because let's face it, there are abuses in every industry. So this series of reports focused on the financial costs, and that was in order to get people's attention and to make this topic matter. For many atheists, the need for secularism is a bit blurry. What's the harm of allowing people with paranormal beliefs from congregating and sharing stories? And as Andy says, there's even some good in it. Bringing up issues of abuse or corruption in religion make the believers, and even some believers, dig in their heels and claim that these are isolated incidents or even outright deny them. And then they'll go on to defend religion, citing the good that is done by congregations around the world. And to some extent, I empathize with their position. We know that connectedness is important to mental health and to physical health, and that churches are one way of providing this connection. And we acknowledge that church groups often do good works in the community. So I'd like to reframe this for you because I believe that religion is a social club. Some people find their community with other tennis players, with dancers, bridge players, artists, or any other number of clubs where people with shared interests congregate. Some people find this community in religion. And I believe that, as with all social clubs, there are good and bad religious clubs and good and bad religious members. Often, the good works done by churches are cited as a reason to support them. However, many other social clubs choose one or more projects in the community to help with. They may do this to form stronger connections among members, to recruit new members, or for purely altruistic reasons. How is this different from the work of a church group? By focusing on financial cost, we have the opportunity to quantify the cost, and we help people to see that government support of religious pluralism is not a benign activity. Rather, it is an activity that forces all taxpayers to fund these religious social clubs. Let's be sure that we all understand the obvious. Money is finite. The government uses monies raised primarily through a variety of taxation to redistribute wealth and fund programs and services. If there's less money coming into government coffers, there are three basic options. We can raise more money, and this is most often through new or increased taxation. We can reduce services, or we can increase debt. So the financial benefits religious organizations enjoy as a result of their charitable purpose comes at a direct cost to all Canadians, that of a tax increase, a program reduction, or debt. So throughout these reports, we have used exceedingly conservative numbers, and we've done this so that the reports are completely believable and provable. And I would encourage you to go to the reports for more information on this. But I think that you'll agree, in spite of how conservative we've been, the numbers are exceedingly provocative. To fully understand the information that I'm providing today, you need to understand a little bit about Canada's charity system. The Government of Canada gives charitable status to organizations that contribute to the social welfare of Canada. This charitable status provides significant financial benefits to charities. As a result, there's a strict set of rules governing who gets charitable status and what they must do to maintain that status. This is all governed by the Canada Revenue Agency. And here's language from their website regarding how an organization qualifies for registration. To be registered as a charity, your organization's purposes and activities must also meet a public benefit test. To qualify under this test, your organization must show that its purposes and activities provide a measurable benefit to the public. The people who are eligible for the benefits are either the public as a whole or a significant section of it. The beneficiaries cannot be a restricted group or one where members share a private connection. This includes social clubs and professional organizations. If your organization wants to limit its beneficiaries unreasonably or offer an unreasonable benefit to a group or individual, it will not qualify for registration. So with that in mind, there are 4 charitable categories, or what are called heads of charity in Canada. All charities must identify that they fit under one of these heads: advancement of education, and this is where CFIC fits, relief of poverty, other purposes beneficial to the community, and advancement of religion. And this is the category we're discussing today. The CRA definition of this category: there must be an element of theistic worship, which means the worship of a deity or deities in the spiritual sense. To advance religion in the charitable sense means to preach and advance the spiritual teachings of a religious faith and to maintain the doctrines and spiritual observances on which those teachings are based, such as establishing and maintaining buildings for religious worship and other religious use, organizing and providing religious instruction, and carrying out pastoral and missionary work. In 2004, there was a court judgment, and it identified that in order to be considered in the advancement of religion category, a charity must promote religious doctrine, spread its message ever wider among mankind, take positive steps to sustain and increase religious belief, and otherwise be pastoral and missionary in nature. In other words, these are charitable because each of them is trying to recruit you into their social club. Each year, charities must complete a form called the T3010 and board members, all their sources of income and expenses, among other things. So in order to write these reports, we requested this data, and we used it to calculate the financial cost of the charities that identify under the category advancement of religion. If you're ever interested in finding out this information, you can look up any organization, any charitable organization in Canada on the CRA website or on the Bloomberg website that is frequently referenced in our reports. So I'm going to tell you a bit about what these charities look like. There are over 32,000 charities in the advancement of religion category, and that is more than 37% of Canada's 86,000 charities. You can see here the distribution of these charities across Canada. So just to note, anytime we reference the geographic location of a charity, it refers to the location of their head office. So a charity with a head office in one province may actually operate buildings or programs in several provinces. So just a reminder that there are more than 32,000 records. So we didn't look at every charity. We couldn't look at every charity. But for every calculation we made, we did do extensive testing to ensure that the numbers were correct and the totals make sense. On the T3010, charities provide more detail about their activities. And in the advancement of religion category, charities have to either identify with a faith group as supporting religion or as a foundation. So of the 32,000 charities in the category, almost 28,000 identified with a specific faith, and about 4,500 identified as supporting religion, and a small handful identified as foundations. The 27,000 charities that identify with a faith are what you likely imagine when we say religious charity. This would be a congregation of some sort. In a minute, I'm going to show you the faith distribution of those 27,000 charities. The subset support of religion that's provided by CRA includes 22 items. Some of them are cemeteries, convents and monasteries, faith-based counseling, mission and missionary organizations, crusades, endowments for specific faith-based organizations, music, youth ministries, camps. I could go on, but I won't. I do want to be 100% transparent. This category includes some organizations that you likely will not believe are religious. Most notably, it includes many of Canada's YMCAs and YWCAs. I suspect that you would agree that these are not terribly religious organizations. And maybe it's time that we lobby for the removal of the C from their name. In fact, I have joined the Y, and I am not young, I am not male, and I am not Christian. So maybe they have to change it altogether. I'm sure that these organizations got their start in Christianity, but have steadily become more secular, and their continued identification as a religious charity is likely a legacy. However, most of these groups appear to be overtly religious, and some fall somewhere between the Y and an evangelical mission. Many provide services to everyone in the community, where the services involve some form of indoctrination. For example, a soup kitchen that requires people to pray or otherwise embrace Jesus Christ before receiving a meal. One of the largest of these organizations, which provides housing and support to individuals with a developmental disability, is Christian Horizons. Although they technically serve everyone, some people might object to the indoctrination of their developmentally delayed family member into Christianity and therefore may not be able to access these services. Because the support of religion might be somewhat confusing, just a screenshot of the first, and they're very random, 23 organizations in the CRA database that they sent to me. So you can see what, first of all, what these organizations look like. But also you can imagine, if this is 23 of them, how impossible it is to scroll through and pick out which ones are not religious. But to my eye, when I look at these, I say, yes, there are some outliers like the Ys, but the vast majority of these truly are organizations that are proselytizing. And inasmuch as there are a handful of non-religious organizations in the advancement of religion category, there are hundreds or perhaps even thousands of religious orders that are running charities that have organized under one of the other heads of charity. The religious charities we are talking about are only the tip of the iceberg. Advancement of education is a huge category. Religious schools and universities fall under this category. Think about Trinity Western University. To be affiliated with the university, students and staff must sign a community covenant that restricts their activities to those considered acceptable by the church. Most notably, the covenant discriminates against LGBTQ+ population. Hospitals also are often run by religious orders. Again, they're accessible to anyone, but they limit the services to those that are congruent with their religious doctrine, most notably not allowing abortion, medical assistance in dying, and sometimes even birth control. Counseling services are often faith-based, Catholic family services, Jewish family services, the list goes on and on. However, we've not looked at these, and the cost of religion that we're reporting on excludes any faith-based organization that hasn't specifically registered under the charitable purpose advancing religion. So perhaps you're actually interested in the findings, and I'm going to run through some of these. And again, spoiler alert, if you're reading them and you're wanting to wait to hear what they are, you may want to just mute me for the rest of this presentation. So these reports provide a lot of detail about how we arrived at the numbers. However, for fear of lulling you to sleep, I've left out a significant amount of that detail today. If you do have specific questions about methodology, I'll try to answer them following the presentation, or you can email me later and I'm happy to let you know. And as I mentioned earlier, John is here and he's giving me moral support, but I also know he'll help me with some answers if I get stuck. So there were slightly less than 28,000 charities in the advancement of religion category. We've talked a lot about those other ones that are supporting religion, but I want you to understand why we're talking about fewer organizations now than the 32,000. So the graph on the left shows you the number of religious charities by province and by creed. So since the vast majority of religious charities in Canada are Christian, it's pretty tough on that left-hand slide to determine the number of other faith groups that are represented. So the chart on the right shows you the percentage of religions in each province that identify with specific creeds. I need you to specifically take note of the fact that this graph starts at 86%. So although it appears that a large number of the charities in Ontario, Quebec, and British Columbia identify as Christian, really it's more than 90% in every single province. So charities hold a tremendous amount of equity. Please don't try to add the columns because I've left out the liability columns in an effort to make you the numbers able to be read. The $15 billion that religious charities hold in cash and long-term investments is staggering, and it's very accurate. The land and buildings values are likely significantly understated because in accounting, land and buildings are calculated as the purchase price of the land plus the depreciated value of the building. So the land and building is worth less every year unless there's work done to the building. So given the current and historic real estate market in Canada, I suspect you'll all agree that most of these properties could be sold for significantly more than reported here. However, even with this caveat, the total equity of these religious organizations is in excess of $38 billion. So I'm going to move on to talk about charitable tax receipting. When you receive a charitable tax receipt, as you would, let's say, if you made a donation to CFIC, you can submit it with your income tax to receive a reduction in the amount of income tax payable. You probably know this, but you may not know how much of a reduction. If you donate a total to all charities of $200 or less in a year, you'll receive 15% of this back on your income tax. However, for every dollar over $200 that you donate, you'll receive a 29% tax credit. But it still could be worth far more. If you were fortunate enough to be in the top income bracket, which in 2018 was over $200,000 a year, you would receive a 33% tax rebate on donation amounts over $200. And regardless of your tax bracket, if you donated stocks which had appreciated, you could avoid paying the capital gains tax on the appreciated amount and still enjoy the full tax credit. So please read the reports for clarity on these items. We provide two scenarios. In the first, we assume that every cent that was donated to religious charities in 2018 only received the 15% rebate. So that is every donor donated less than $200 a year to all causes. So this is an incredibly conservative assumption and terribly unrealistic. Even with that level of conservation, those charitable tax receipts would be worth over $1.7 billion in 2018 alone. Our much more realistic estimate, which provided for a 29% rebate, would result in a $3.2 billion tax loss in 2018. And remember, this still assumes there were no high income earners that donated and no gifts of stock. Governments often transfer money to charities to carry out their work. Sometimes the money is to pay for specific services that were contracted for by the government, and sometimes to provide help with operating expenses, or maybe to pay for government imposed regulations such as pay equity or upgrading facilities to increase accessibility. Whatever the reasons, governments in Canada transferred over $1 billion to Canadian religious charities in 2018. The YMCA of Greater Toronto received the largest municipal transfer in 2018 of nearly $75 million. And in fact, the majority of the top 10 largest municipal grants went to the Ys, with a couple of exceptions. Bridges of Canada, a prison chaplaincy program in New Brunswick, received over $7 million from municipal government. The Ukrainian Sisters of St. Joseph's in Saskatoon received almost $4.5 million. And the House of Friendship, an Ontario organization providing community resources whose values are inspired by the Christian faith, received more than $4 million. Christian Horizons received the largest provincial transfer, just over $163 million. As mentioned earlier, while all families can access services from Christian Horizons, they would have to be comfortable with their developmentally delayed sons and daughters receiving an evangelical message. Finally, the largest federal transfer, which I find shocking, of over $22 million went to the Kelowna Christ Center Society, providing Christian education, Christian preschool, Christian outreach, pastoral care, Christian daycare, and weekly church services. The Kelowna Christian Center, where people belong and Jesus matters, and your tax dollar goes to work. So finally, we looked at the impact of charitable status on taxes that religious charities would have to pay if they were not eligible for charitable status. My informal and totally non-scientific review of the literature, and by literature I mean posts on Facebook, tell me that when people complain about churches not paying taxes, they most commonly talk about income tax. And John and I actually spent considerable time, maybe more John than me, calculating how much income tax churches would pay were they taxed as businesses. In the end, however, we decided against publishing this amount. Realistically, if the advancement of religion was removed as a charitable purpose, the vast majority of these charities could be reconstituted as nonprofits, and income tax still does not apply to nonprofit organizations. As mentioned earlier, we did make a conscious decision to provide conservative numbers that would stand up to scrutiny. So for the taxation portion of these reports, we have compared the taxation of religious charities to that of nonprofit organizations, not business. So there are two areas in which nonprofits have to pay income tax and charities don't: some forms of rental income and capital gains. So we don't have information about capital gains for these charities. We do know that they cumulatively earned over $350 million in rent. What portion of this income was for rentals that would trigger income tax? So although we're confident that there is some foregone income tax revenue, we've not been able to calculate the amount, and therefore we haven't included it. Sales tax is another area in which nonprofits contribute to the government coffers and charities do not. When selling certain goods and services to the public, nonprofits are required to charge sales tax, while most charities aren't. The challenge is that we don't have enough detail about what these charities are selling to know whether they would trigger sales tax. So again, we've ignored it. We do know that they would contribute some sales tax were they to be reconstituted as nonprofits. So you want to know what we do know. Charities do receive a rebate on a portion of the sales tax that they incur. This is called the Public Service Body Rebate. The federal tax rebate is half of the 5% sales tax, and that's available to charities across Canada. Some provinces also rebate a portion of the provincial sales tax. We have estimated which of the expenses reported on the T3010 would trigger sales tax and used the rebate information for each province to calculate the amount of rebate these charities would receive. And that is over $300 million. So property tax is the final thing I'm going to talk about. It's another large area where generally it would be difficult to calculate lost tax revenues. So you will recall that religious charities value their land and buildings at over $26 billion, and that this amount is likely significantly understated because it reflects the purchase price less the depreciation on the buildings. So normally $26 billion in real estate would result in a significant amount of property tax being charged. So most charities in Canada are eligible to receive a reduction in the amount of property tax they pay. Unfortunately, since the mill rate differs between municipalities, the reported value of land and buildings doesn't reflect the current value, and different types of charities receive different amounts of property tax rebate. We can't tell you the cost of this. Churches receive an even better deal from municipalities than most charities. Every province and territory in Canada exempts churches and usually cemeteries from paying property tax. Normally, this would not be terribly helpful in calculating the cost. However, in 2019, the province of New Brunswick studied lost municipal tax revenue, and they actually quantified the cost of the property tax exemption for churches. So we used the ratio of the value of land and buildings of religious charities in New Brunswick to the calculated loss to religious charities across Canada. The result would be a staggering $881 million. So if you're having trouble keeping track here, here's our very conservative estimate of the annual cost of designating advancement of religion as a charitable purpose. Imagine right now what Canada could do with an extra $5.5 billion each year. For comparison, and thanks again, John, the annual budget of the Government of Canada is $334 billion. Ontario, our largest province, has a budget of $154 billion, and the City of Toronto has a budget of $14.4 billion. To put this on a per capita basis, $5.5 billion works out to approximately $145 per year per person, or $50 a month for a family of 4. How would you feel about a religious institution support tax risk of $600 per family per year? Yeah, you'd really have to twist my wrist. Before I answer questions, I want to reiterate my ask. Please tell at least one person about these reports. Better yet, share the reports. Let's ensure that Canadians understand that religious pluralism is different from secularism, and that there's a very high price to pay for it. So thank you. Give me 1 second to figure out how to get rid of my presentation. There we go. And stop sharing my screen. Oh, I guess I could have put myself on for that. Answer questions.
Yeah, so thank you very much for the presentation, Sandra. So I have got a couple of questions that came in through the chat. I just want to let people know about the timing. We are running a little bit late, and we're going to eat into our break a little bit and try to get back on schedule. So anyway, let's move on with the questions. So so one question is, and both actually, there's two questions. They're both related to meals for hungry people. So the question is, are the religious charities doing good by providing food to people, and are they also affecting harm? What about requiring prayer for charitable meals to the poor? But on the other hand, some people say, well, yes, but are we going to just feed the hungry people this report, because the churches are really doing something? So that being said, go ahead, Sandra.
Not all food banks are run by religious charities. There are certainly many secular ones. And while this may be sort of ancillary to what they do, if they were a social group and they chose to run a food bank, I'm quite confident that they could receive charitable status for the food bank portion of what they do under the Relief of Poverty head of charity. So I don't think that eliminating religious charities as a charitable purpose would have to necessarily reduce funding that would go to feeding the poor. I think that the question of whether requiring people to pray does more harm than good, I think that's up to you to decide. I think we have a really long history of paying people essentially to believe in our God, and I think that that's not proven to be a really good thing to do. But I do believe that everybody has to answer that question for themselves. Hope I got that.
I don't see any other questions. So I'll give you another few seconds. If anybody has a question, get it in the chat real quick.
There is a question from Kevin Brown.
Okay, go ahead, Leslie, and pose Kevin's question.
Okay, Kevin asks, what proportion of activities of religious charities is allowed by the CRA to be deemed political?
So this is a question bigger than religious charities. So it used to be that there was a restriction on the amount of political activity or advocacy work that any charity could do. And this was overturned, I think it was about 2 years ago, and we've written about it a few times. So now there is no limit as long as that activity is not partisan. However, what I want to let you know that really concerns CFI. So previously we used to worry sort of about the fact that we were not able to advocate for our position, or we had to restrict our advocacy for that position because of this rule. But when you consider the budget for CFI and or all secular organizations in Canada to promote the importance of secularism, it is so tiny compared to the budget of religious charities to promote their religious mandate. And this is where I say this is critical that we discuss what are we really doing here? What do we believe in? And how much do we believe in it if we want to change it? Because we have this tiny little budget that we're, this report was written 100% with volunteer time. And I have to tell you, volunteers put a tremendous amount of hours into this. And I think that Leslie maybe doesn't remember what his family looks like because he's been back and forth with me on these reports so many times. It's huge, but we did it because it's important. And trying to get people in the secular community to understand the importance and then to advocate is really important. So I know that that's not, I haven't limited my answer to what Kevin asked, but Kevin gave me a really good opportunity to tell you something that I'm really passionate about.
Thank you, Sandra. And John Manuel, who had worked on this report, you had a comment to make, so go ahead, John.
I do. Thank you very much. I just want to add, not to distract, but to add to something that Sandra said earlier. She said that you would have a 33% maximum. That is the federal grant to taxpayers who have made charitable donations. The provincial government also allows for credits. You pay provincial and federal income taxes, and both levels of government provide for deductions or credits for charitable donations. In fact, although different provinces have different provincial tax rates, the minimum benefit for a donation over $200 is 40%, and the maximum just over 50%. Now, to take that a step further, there was a huge religious organization building erected in the area where Sandra and I live. And it was touted that no government money went into this building. It was all private donations. And I said, wait a minute, every dollar of personal money that went into that building was subsidized by all levels of government to the tune of at least 40% and as much as 50%. So don't be fooled when people tell you that private money went into this project. The government handsomely subsidized all personal donations. And that is an important point that many people just ignore. It's my own money. I can do what I like. No, it's not your own money. Half of it is my money, government money that I have paid taxes to support. Sorry.
Thank you, John. And this is where John helps me. The numbers I present were not the 15 and the 29%. That was the tax bracket that they were in. The numbers I presented did include the provincial and the federal taxes, and we calculated them with each one, and that is in the report. And thank you for the clarification, John.
Okay, so thank you very much, Sandra, and thank you very much, John.